Thank y'all. And before I get started, I do want to shout out to the sisters in the room who keep showing up for us in many ways, even at the sacrifice of themselves. That's very important to me that we recognize that. So let me go ahead and get underway so I can get out of the way. Okay, so when undertaking an examination of the contemporary condition of incarceration in the United States as it relates to women, a recent phenomenon has emerged at the state level of analysis. A carefully weaved tale delineating the particular from the universal has resulted in the rendering of white women as both sympathetic subjects within purview of the law and as deserving of life-preserving resources, as black women are subjected to new and continued forms of imprisonment, delimitation, and death. This peculiar choreography of law that allows for the saving of one and the disposability of another perhaps should not be surprising. Legal scholar Cheryl Harris notes, quote, "Inequalities that are produced and reproduced are not given inevitabilities, but rather are conscious selections regarding the structuring of social relations," end quote. Stated differently, the continued abuse and delimitation black women experience are not merely a one-off or a coincidental incident. Rather, these incidences are attempted state superimposed bodily disintegration, are intentional and are mapped out through policies, laws, and various legal technologies of repression. Further, these modalities of subjugation continue their violent and punitive nature through the carceral. However, in all of this, black women are still here, and their lived experiences represent a critical intervention in the understanding of the carceral and its quotidian nature. Trishawn Tardessa Carey was arrested on March 1st, 2015 at 545 San Pedro Street in downtown Los Angeles. She was charged with assault with a deadly weapon against a police officer and resisting arrest. The videotape from the scene does not support these charges. The charges were leveled after an officer had dropped his baton while attempting to arrest Brother Africa, a well-known member of the Skid Row community. As the state-induced scuffle to arrest Brother Africa went on, Trishawn picked up the dropped baton and held it in front of her person, maybe perhaps to protect herself. The abundance of police officers attempting to arrest Brother Africa, whom they eventually killed. Trishawn never waved the baton nor approached police officers in a threatening manner. On July 22nd, 2015, after 5 months in jail and restrained by $1 million bail, Trishawn was finally granted a bail hearing. During the hearing, Trishawn's attorney Milton Grimes petitioned for her bail to be lowered. However, Deputy District Attorney Gregory Denton spoke against these efforts and insisted, despite video evidence to the contrary, that Trishawn intended to strike one of the officers with the baton. He further supported his assertion by suggesting that punishing Trishawn was, quote, no big deal because it was just one woman. While there are many other important aspects of Trishawn's experience which should be known, for brevity and consideration, I will stop here. Trishawn's encounter allows for an expanded and nuanced understanding where am I at? Just kidding. Trishawn's encounter allows for an expanded and nuanced understanding of carcerality, one which challenges, disrupts, and simultaneously expands the contemporary dominant paradigm of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex. More particularly, Trishawn's overall experience with LAPD as a result of that fateful March day suggests that mass incarceration, as defined and employed in research and data, along with the prison industrial complex, has come to operate as analytic disjunctures within the larger discourse of carcerality as it pertains to the experiences of black women with the carceral state. In other words, mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex are much more than definitions or terms to understand a contemporary phenomenon. Rather, mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex as a term and definition have come to operate as unacknowledged conceptual and theoretical frameworks in research. It is to this silent existence in research that I draw our attention today. Deputy District Attorney Denton's comments suggested the position of the state of California regarding black women is one of disposability, that black women do not hold any value in California society except to be considered as corporeal locales whereby the state may produce and signify its power, as well as freely perform state violence. Denton's comment dehumanized Carey. From his perspective as district attorney, Carey was adequately described as it, as opposed to using Treshawn's preferred gender pronouns or using her name. For Denton, Carey was impossible to see as a subject. Rather, she was an animate object in public space who could not suffer any illness or violation and was fit for the most extreme punishment the state of California could offer by way of the March 1st incident, life in prison. Denton's assertion in his quantitative analysis that Carey was just one woman could not have been further from the truth. Nationally, black women make up 30% of all incarcerated women in the U.S., despite black women being 13% of the U.S. population. More specifically, for Treshawn Carey of Skid Row's residents, which number about 10,000 according to a 2013 survey, roughly a quarter are women, and of that figure, 57.4% are black and are also aging with increasing health needs. Treshawn's lived experience with carcerality dovetails with the heavily criminalized women of Skid Row, 44% of whom has been arrested, and 37% of whom have been cited, and 100% of whom reside in what I term as a public carceral sphere. Before turning to the public carceral sphere's critical social theory, it is important to gain an understanding of how mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex as analytical frameworks renders Treshawn an impossible carceral subject. As many of us know, mass incarceration refers to the prison population of a nation. So it is no revelation, perhaps, that the first critique of mass incarceration is that it is limited by institutional framing. In his 2001 text, Mass Imprisonment, Social Causes and Consequences, David Garland, who first defined mass incarceration within the academy, that is, theorized it this way as provided on the screen. Garland's articulation of mass imprisonment that he provides requires a few things and assumes a few things, which I have also provided on the slide. This list is not exhaustive, thank you. This list is not exhaustive, rather it gives a synopsis of the theoretical problem that I am getting at. As a result, these assumptions within Garland's text, one comes to understand imprisonment and carcerality as institutional and largely informed through the subject position of black males. Therefore, Garland's articulation of mass imprisonment does not and cannot map the experiences of Treshawn Carey and many other black women within its definition and framing. Here, Audre Lorde's time-transcendent question becomes particularly relevant. What does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? Audre Lorde provides an answer. It means that only the most narrow perimeters of change are possible and allowable. And this is precisely the location of reform efforts concerning carcerality in the United States due to politicians and organizers carefully and intentionally positioning reforms within the framework of mass incarceration. As indicated on the screen, this is the location where Treshawn was arrested in the pop out there, and also where black women constitute over 50% of the population. If we view this space within the paradigm and framework of mass incarceration as articulated by David Garland and others, Treshawn occupied a non-punitive space. By employing mass incarceration as a framework, Treshawn and the many other black women who also encountered LAPD that fateful March morning on San Pedro in downtown Los Angeles are understood as deviant subjects in scholarship, in public research, and their behavior comes to rationalize or be the cause of the presence of LAPD. Further, what we also understand via mass incarceration as a framework within the discourse of carcerality is that the carceral apparatus of the state is limited in its scope and occupies very little geographic terrain within the public sphere. However, this approach allows for the most narrow perimeters of change. So as opposed to rendering methods whereby one may abolish the carceral state, the approach of mass incarceration forces us to talk numbers. How many people do we want to incarcerate and how long? Similar to mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex also has its limitations. Though it is useful in helping us to understand the reach of carcerality, there is much to the prison industrial complex. However, at the most basic level, we understand the concept speaks to the meeting of industry and carcerality, and how various industries come to buttress its bottom line by participating in the carceral state in various ways via capitalism. However, within this lens, one is not able to map the experience of Treshawn Carey, as she is seeking to profit from forced, as she is not seeking to profit from forced conditions of carcerality, nor is she an industry. Further, to the extent that one may be able to map Treshawn's experience via a prison industrial complex framing, her experience is limited due to the rendering which is limited to the rendering which the industries within that analysis permits, preventing Treshawn's experience with the state from being wholly seen, analyzed, and epistemologically valuable on its own terms. So here I suggested we should move to an understanding of the public carceral sphere through the use of the critical. More specifically, I direct our attention to Patricia Hill Collins and how she defines out the critical. I want to direct our attention to the fourth bullet point that she moves there. As I move through time, I'm going to skip over some things so that I can get to my main point and get out of the way. So what I want to get to is the the public carceral sphere. Okay, so I'll just go here. The superimposition of carcerality in public space materializes as what I term as the public carceral sphere. A public carceral sphere is composed of public spaces that are both explicitly defined and delimited by law, thus impacting the citizenship experiences and rights of those residing within its boundaries. Public carceral spheres may exist simultaneously, multi-regionally, are mobile and subjective. Furthermore, it is important to note the public carceral sphere is merely a single component of a larger state phenomenon. However, its presence has been largely ignored as part of the state's carceral cartography. When viewed in its entirety, we come to understand there exists in the state a practice of network carceral spheres which are linked by way of a symbiotic relationship that is animated by law, working to constrain the body, delimit rights. Y'all excuse me, this is single space, which is my bad, and I have prescription frames, so I'm kind of sort of. When viewed within its entirety, we come to understand there exists in the state a practice of network carceral spheres, which are linked by way of a symbiotic relationship that is animated by law, working to constrain the body, delimit rights, and showcase state power to dispossess and kill. Further, public carceral spheres are often superimposed on communities. Thus, they become a part of daily life and are inescapable. Presented within this framing, then, the experiences of Black women and their encounters with the carceral state come into sharp relief. Within this context, we understand the injury of Black women to be one of gendered duress. Gender duress being a, quote, a choreography of law, which imposes forced conditions of confinement, the persistent threat of harm, and or the constraining of rights in the hidden injury that Black women experience, inclusive of gender-based violence. Shout out to Beth Ritchie, who got me together yesterday. I define gender duress as choreography because it is a carefully crafted dance of disavowal, universalism in which violations are not acknowledged by law as illegal or injurious until it is mapped onto white bodies. It is lawfully permitted bias, resulting in the penalization of both a racialized and gendered status as opposed to conduct. In closing, one is able to unveil the quotidian experience of gender duress Black women experience because of the analytical corrective the public carceral sphere provides. Further, by way of the public carceral sphere, the many and various sites of carcerality are illuminated along with the many experiences that take place within them. The continued use and silent presence of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex's theoretical frameworks works to obscure the particular and the universal experience Black women experience with the carceral state in public spaces. To illuminate the experiences of Black women and speak to their importance, as well as reveal the multiple and various sites of violence in the carceral state imposes, it is important that we correct the framework, lest we punish Black women anew in our collective work to abolish the carceral state. And this is important because, like men, the women also know, and that knowing is epistemic and deeply sociological. Thank you.